Welcome to Canadian Justice. I'm Christine Van Gyn, and today we're talking about magic mushrooms, psychedelic drugs, and their potential therapeutic uses and current legal status. Magic mushrooms are currently a prohibited substance in Canada, or more specifically, mushrooms containing the active ingredient psilocybin are prohibited. This is the hallucinogenic substance in the mushroom, and it's listed as a Schedule III controlled substance. Possession of magic mushrooms is considered to be the same thing as possession of psilocybin and is subject to criminal prosecution. But new information about the therapeutic uses of psilocybin and magic mushrooms is emerging, especially for the treatment of anxiety and depression in palliative care patients. Last year, the Canadian government made an exemption in our drug laws that allowed 4 palliative care patients to try using magic mushrooms to treat end-of-life distress. Dozens more exemptions were approved following that, but now the pace of approvals for exemptions has slowed. Advocates are arguing to end the prohibition on magic mushrooms and to approve these drugs for therapeutic use. Here today to discuss what's next for this product, for this drug, is patient Thomas Hartle, the first person to access legal psilocybin in Canada. Will then be joined by the CEO of the advocacy organization TheraPsil, Spencer Hawkswell. Mr. Hartle, thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope that you're doing well. Now, you were the first patient to receive a 1-year exemption that allowed you to use psilocybin as part of treatment, therapeutic treatment. And I think a lot of people want to know, how exactly is this drug used as a therapeutic?
Well, the drug is used as a tool, so it's a part of the therapy. It doesn't constitute the entire therapy itself. So where some people may think that it's similar to the way that other drugs are used, you take a pill and your problem goes away. Psilocybin-assisted therapy doesn't work like that. It's actually regular therapy and psilocybin added to a part of that therapy, which helps you to reach issues that are otherwise like a hot potato for you.
And when you say regular therapy, you mean like psychotherapy?
Right. So the actual therapy itself consists of a number of therapy sessions where you establish your relationship with your therapist, your expectations, the types of things you might expect while you are actually undergoing the psilocybin itself. Then you have the psilocybin session, and then they have what they call integration sessions following that, which help you to incorporate the things that you have gained from the experience.
And what exactly does that involve? What does it feel like to use this product, and what does it feel like to use it in therapy?
Well, psilocybin is a mind-altering substance, so it is absolutely psychedelic. It has a number of physical side effects that you can experience while you're on it, shivers and difficulty controlling your body temperature, obviously differences to your vision and what you experience in an auditory. It has the ability to cross-connect some of your senses, so you can feel a sound or smell sights. It does things like that, but more importantly, it gets rid of some of the pathways in your mind that are your defaults. So for somebody like myself who has subjects where I have difficulty addressing my end-of-life distress, it allows me, instead of avoiding those things, to be able to accept them and embrace them more easily. And in that way, it allows me to deal with some of those issues in ways that I would not be able to otherwise.
So it's had a pretty significant impact on your quality of life.
Really significant, yes. In terms of just my day-to-day being able to live in the present moment has been very significant for me. So instead of having my thought processes wrapped up in the idea of my shortened lifespan that I have, I can focus more on being able to be present with my family and take part in the really meaningful things in life instead of thinking about death.
I'm happy to hear that it's made a positive impact for you. And you had a 1-year exemption. What's the status of that exemption now?
My exemption expired on August the 4th. So I am now in the same position as a number of other Canadians who are going to be waiting for an exemption or a change in legislation to take place.
When we come back from this commercial break, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I want to talk to you about how you obtained that exemption and what's going to come next for patients like you who no longer have access to this therapy.
For sure.
Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing hallucinogenic magic mushrooms, their potential medical uses, and their legal status with patient Tom Hartle. Now, Tom, before the break, we were discussing how your exemption that had been granted for you to use this drug has expired. So what's next for you and other patients?
Well, my hope is that we'll be getting some changes to the actual legislation that will make the process of access to the psilocybin more consistent for more people. So patients like myself who have a terminal illness seem to be getting the exemptions granted on a little more regular basis, whereas some patients who are suffering from things like treatment-resistant depression or conditions like that are having a slower time with the process. Personally, I would like to see that change so that it's, again, more consistent, because these conditions are no less serious than my own condition.
Now, I want to touch on what you just said about the different conditions it's used for. So can you expand on what other patients are using this type of therapy for, this drug in therapy for, and what other stories you've heard from fellow patients who have had an impact on their quality of life improved because of this use?
Yep. Most of the patients that I have spoken to are terminal patients like myself. There are a large number of studies that have taken place in institutions like Johns Hopkins, where they have used this for treatment for not just anxiety, but depression. Very good work done in addictions as well. So this has proven to be a substance that is effective for a number of different things. PTSD, I think, is another area where they've been investigating as well.
And how hard was it for you to get the exemption? You were the first person to be granted this exemption in Canada. Do you know how many total there have been and how hard it was for you to kind of break through there and be the first one?
I'm not too sure how many there are currently have been granted. I believe it's in the neighborhood of 50 or 60 at the last I heard. The process for getting it for myself took about 100 days. And for somebody with a terminal illness, 100 days is a significant chunk of time. There are people who have been waiting far longer than I have waited for their current exemptions.
Why do you think it is taking so long for these exemptions to get granted?
Couple of possibilities. We do have an election happening right now, and unfortunately, this is a bit of a hot potato for election people, but I would like to think that we'll maybe see some changes in that, because the benefit that people could experience from this, I think, has the potential to, benefit hundreds and hundreds of Canadians, honestly.
Now, I want to ask how you actually take the product. I know we're talking about it as a magic mushroom, but it's a mushroom that you take it as a mushroom, or is it in a pill form?
For my usage, I had to grow my own because you can't buy it legally here in Canada. And I then dried it and put it into capsules, which for me was the easiest way to take it.
And you're right. The spores and the product before it's actually a grown mushroom doesn't contain any psilocybin, so it's actually not illegal to buy and grow the spores. But it becomes illegal once it grows into this mushroom that contains that drug. Are you concerned that with a lack of exemptions for this, for patients who need it, they might be moving to the black market to purchase products if they're not growing them themselves?
Yes, unfortunately, that's another one of the challenges that I experienced when I got my exemption, was you just can't get it from any legal source. And so in terms of the consistency and accuracy of dosing, I believe that it would be a lot safer if this was regulated in a similar way to the cannabis industry, where we have licensed producers or at least somebody producing something that is going to be a consistent product to expect a consistent result.
And we've only got about 30 seconds left, but if you're not, if you don't have an exemption, will you be able to find a psychotherapist who will work with you on this type of therapy if you're buying black market product?
Well, again, there are people who have, there are therapists who have exemptions. So that is, the therapy side of it is definitely available. There are people who are trained, but getting the product is going to be more of a challenge.
Well, it's been really fascinating to talk to you, Tom, and I really wish you all the best. I hope that you're feeling good. I hope that you are able to regain access to this and that it improves the quality of your life and you enjoy the time you have with your family and friends.
Thank you for bringing this issue to Canadians.
Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing hallucinogenic or magic mushrooms and their potential medical uses. We're joined now by CEO of the advocacy organization TheraPsil, Spencer Hawkswell. Mr. Hawkswell, thanks so much for joining us. Now, your organization has advocated to make psilocybin legal and regulated so it can be used for the therapy that Tom told us about. And you actually sent a 165-page proposal to Health Canada about it. So what exactly are you proposing?
Yeah, so we're proposing medical regulations for psilocybin. We've appropriately called them the APMPR, much like the ACMPR or AMPR that were the cannabis regulations in Canada. The idea behind this being in Canada, we have a perfect framework to get a controlled substance regulated for medical use. As you may have spoken with Tom, this is, for many Canadians, a medicine and something that they need to use. So these are regulations so that they can access it with the help of a doctor.
So how does psilocybin, I guess, regulation or decriminalization, you're proposing regulation, how does it compare to cannabis, as you mentioned? We know that cannabis was introduced as a medical product, but it's now transitioned into being a fully recreational product as well. Is that part of the proposal, or is that somewhere it would eventually head?
Well, for right now, we're just focused on strictly the medical use. So there is, as you said, recreational use of cannabis, but that's not what we're talking about right now. We're focused on how there are Canadians using it for medical purposes and making sure that they don't have to fight tooth and nail, much like the people who fought to get access to cannabis had to fight. So, we stand on the shoulders of giants in this country. We've got fantastic medical cannabis regulations that we can emulate and create psilocybin regulations. So strictly speaking, it's just medical use. And at this point in time, that's where we should be focusing.
So you mentioned fighting tooth and nail, and your organization has actually recently been to court over the fact that the government's been dragging its feet on approvals for the new exemptions for people like Tom, patients who want to access this drug. Why do you think the health ministry has been so slow?
That's a great question. Certainly the election doesn't help. It's been a tough year. COVID has obviously played a huge role in slowing down these exemptions, but it didn't stop the first exemptions from getting access back in August of last year, right in really the height of COVID. So it's not an excuse not to respond to patients and doctors. And as you did say, we are currently in court with a mandamus application to the health minister, Patty Hajdu.
Can you explain to our viewers what a mandamus application is?
Absolutely. I forget exactly the Latin term, but it essentially means to force a decision or to force will. So saying that there's a Section 56 process here where a doctor and a patient can apply to get access to a medicine, and that piece of legislation does not exist to be ignored. It exists to be responded to. And specifically in medical matters, it's unacceptable that Canadians, right, with diagnoses of terminal depression and anxiety, terminal cancer and depression and anxiety are dying without getting answers to these applications. Some are waiting 170 days. Completely unacceptable, and we'll bring that to court.
Which, as Tom said in the first segment, if you're waiting over 100 days and you have a terminal illness, 100 days is a really long time when you have a shortened lifespan. So can you tell us where are you in that particular application in the court system?
So at this point, the government has asked for an extension, and unfortunately, we've had to grant it to them because the alternative is actually worse than an extension if you have to fight that. So it's not always great having to go to court for these things. And the unfortunate truth is that the patient is always the one who bears the burden in court. It's not the government, it's not us, it's the patient. So it's unfortunate, but they're stalling. And right now, I think as of September 17th, we should get a response from the government on whether they're going to move forward with the mandamus and fight, or whether they're going to grant the exemption.
And are you working with individual patients, or are you bringing that application as an organization?
Starting with individual patients, and that has been the reason that the organization has been successful, is we stand for the individual Canadians, right, whose rights are being violated. And so right now we have one patient with a mandamus, but we've got 17 other patients and about 150 other healthcare practitioners all ready to put forward the exact same mandamus application. And if this one does not work, we're going to do that. I mean, we're going to take this as far as we possibly can.
Well, you've got a lot of conviction, and I think what you're doing is going to help a lot of people. When we come back from this commercial break, I want to ask you some more questions about the medication itself, how it works, the studies on it, and about those patients that you just mentioned. When we come back, we will get into all of that. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing hallucinogenic or magic mushrooms and their potential medical uses with Spencer Hawkswell, the CEO of the advocacy organization TheraPsil. So Spencer, when we left the last segment, you were telling me about some of the individual patients you're working with in an application in court that you're doing to try and get access to this medication. What can you tell me about those individual patients and their stories?
Yeah, these are Canadians who have been given diagnoses of cancer, many of them terminal, some in remission. And in fact, more recently, we've been supporting veterans with PTSD and Canadians with both treatment-resistant anxiety, depression, and also opioid use disorder. In every instance, these are deserving Canadians who need access to psilocybin. They're supported by a doctor and a therapist who both believe that this is necessary because they've tried all other treatments. They're not eligible, nor are there any clinical trials that they can take place. And this is really their only option, that or go underground and do it without the support from their therapists. So, these are people who have tried everything. And psilocybin represents a reasonable medical decision, and it's also their last option. So what I can tell you is that all of these Canadians under our law are equal, right? We all have the same Charter of Rights and Freedoms that say that we are, free from discrimination from our government, primarily, or not primarily, but also including discrimination due to age, race, or mental or physical disability. So yes, many of them are terminally ill. Some are in remission. Some have, anxiety, depression, others opioid use disorder. They're all equally deserving, though.
Now, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, I remember learning about these drugs in school. And I was taught that there are all kinds of dangers associated with it. So what can you tell me about studies that exist that show either risks or safety associated with the drug?
Yeah, for sure. I'm not going to claim that any substance is safe. It's not. And that applies, I would say mostly to some of the ones that we use freely in society, such as sugar and alcohol and caffeine, tobacco. One thing that I can say is that psilocybin has an incredibly safe profile. And much of the research that's been done, some of my favorite, if viewers want to look up David Nutt's research, has shown that psilocybin is probably one of the safest substances we know of. I think it takes about 17 pounds or kilograms to overdose on it. It's non-addictive. After 3 days, you would stop getting any mind-altering effects. It's a relatively safe substance. However, nothing is perfectly safe. So part of what we've been doing is trying to share the merits and limitations, importantly, of psilocybin. And that's best done through education, not through prohibition, but education, both to doctors, patients, and the Canadian public.
So if we compare this to cannabis, since cannabis was approved, people who invested in it either as a business or as a retail investor or an institutional investor, they've made a fortune. And is there the same kind of excitement or enthusiasm in the business community or in the investment community around potential approvals for this drug?
I mean, absolutely. And I would say that businesses go where the value is, right? Not always just for money, but where value, because money follows value. And there's a ton of value for a lot of people who are using psilocybin because it's more effective than traditional treatment methodologies such as, talk therapy or SSRIs. So it's not surprising to me at all that the market is moving towards psychedelics and that there's this so-called shroom boom. It's not particularly what I'm interested in. I think we've got a fantastic, existing container for this substance, and it's called psychotherapists and doctors. All they need is access to the substance and training, and they can start treating patients. So, yes, there's likely going to be a lot of value created through the use of psychedelics for, the people whom traditional treatments aren't working for. And it's not surprising to see them, advocating alongside us.
Well, I want to thank you so much for the work that you do for patients and for coming on the show today to share your experiences and your story about your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christine.
We've heard today about new potential uses of magic mushrooms as a therapeutic treatment for different illnesses, about how this treatment can improve patients' quality of life, but at the same time, how difficult it is for them to access these drugs. Health Canada is dragging its feet on approving exemptions, and as they drag their feet, the quality of life of these patients deteriorates. Cannabis was originally approved in Canada for medicinal uses, and it's been used by many people to treat all kinds of conditions. Are magic mushrooms the new frontier? You be the judge. I'm Christine Van Gyn, and remember, a freer Canada starts with you.